I seem to spend this morning looking at people's comments. There's one here from Stin who says, apologies as this comment doesn't relate to this specific video. What are your thoughts on this commentary of Caolan Robertson's opinions of why Russians are leaving Russia from a Russian who left Russia? Well, now, Caolan Robertson's videos have attracted controversy because of their bluntness. He referred to some Russian emigres as Amazon refugees, suggesting that many only fled once sanctions bit into their lifestyles. This has provoked understandable anger from exiled Russians who see themselves as principled opponents of Putin's war. Yet I think Caolan's intervention, far from being mere provocation, opens an essential debate. Many people I know fled Russia within days of the war being declared, and they're now on lists of unwanted people and so on. They are homeless, and they encounter the very problems of that homelessness, and sometimes the places where they thought they had found refuge are equally difficult. First, we must recognize that Russia today is one of the most repressive states in the world. Since the early 2010s, Putin has built a formidable propaganda machine, state television, online manipulation, suppression of independent journalism, that has left much of the population cocooned in lies. To dissent is dangerous. Even calling the war a war can land you in prison for 7 to 15 years under the law against discrediting the armed forces. The courage it takes to speak out inside Russia is immense, and the value of speaking out, the effect of speaking out, is often negligible. This helps explain why many didn't flee immediately. Emigration is expensive, complicated, and uncertain, and millions have family ties, elderly parents, jobs and property that simply cannot be abandoned. If you abandon them, you don't know whether or not they are going to be safe. Others hoped, often vainly, that things might improve. To reduce the complexity of these choices to laziness or greed is frankly unfair. But Caolan's central point, that indifference has been a feature of Russian society, cannot be dismissed. We know that from the Levada Center that even now a third of Russians support the continuation of the war. We know that, too, that mass protests are minimal, partly because of fear, partly because of decades of propaganda that have dulled civic responsibility. Caolan is right to identify this apathy as a political problem because the Kremlin thrives on that apathy. So where does that leave us? I would argue that we need both. We need recognition of those brave Russians who fled and now work in exile for Ukrainian relief, for journalism and activism and encouragement of dissent within Russia itself. The real pressure on Putin will not come only from sanctions or from military defeats abroad. It will come when ordinary Russians in sufficient numbers refuse to be cannon fodder or propaganda pawns. They are already signs of this. Anti-conscription protests in Dagestan, mothers groups demanding answers, and even oligarchs losing patience as the state cannibalizes their wealth. Oligarchs being arrested as they try to flee Russia when finally they realize Putin wants their money. In other words, Caolan's harsh rhetoric should be read as an attempt to puncture the myth of a uniformly innocent Russian population. That doesn't mean, however, that Russians are beyond redemption. On the contrary, fomenting opposition inside Russia through underground journalism, through exiled networks, through cultural resistance is vital, and it is growing despite the repression. So my defense of Caolan is this: his video may overstate, but it confronts a real danger. The temptation, the video may overstate the temptation to imagine that all Russians are who left are heroes and all who stayed are helpless. The truth is murkier. Some left for noble reasons, some for selfish ones. Some stayed out of fear, some stayed out of loyalty, some simply stayed because they couldn't leave. What matters is that we support those who resist Putin's war, whatever they are, whenever they are, whoever they are, as what's the name of it? St. John Chrysostom says in his sermon at Easter. You know, you are welcome whether you come 2 weeks before the end of Lent, whether you become 1 day before the end of Lent, or whether you were here at the beginning of Lent. It doesn't matter, as long as you eventually find the resources to say that you're on the right side. You must be welcome. And I hope Russians find those resources to get on the right side. As someone who has studied Russia's propaganda state for well over a decade, I can say this with certainty. The Kremlin's greatest fear is not NATO missiles or Western sanctions. Its greatest fear is the awakening of its own people. And that is why encouraging opposition inside Russia remains essential. And why Caolan, despite the provocations, is right to keep pressing this uncomfortable point. I think my knowledge of Russia, my friendships within Russia, convince me that Russia will awaken, and that Russia will deal with this cancer in the Kremlin. The Smeg fridge needs to be cleaned, and the dirt, the thuggery that has been allowed to collect in that fridge needs to be thrown out and dumped, and a new Russia needs to rise in its place. We can't say what that Russia will be. All we can say is it will not be Putin, and that could happen sooner rather than later. I hope it will, but I can't make any prediction, of course. And more than that, I know that I'm not in Russia, so I can't measure the temperature. When I listen to people like Steve Rosenberg, who I admire without reservation, he is there. He is able to judge the temperature. He is able to judge what is going on, and I get the distinct impression that he is far from pessimistic.